Credible or incredible? I think, given this is the start of your journey, it's probably worth reflecting on what do you aspire to be. And we just need to think about these two words, and particularly incredible. Because what does incredible mean? It means actually unbelievable. And there's a lot of talk about, I'm going to be an incredible whatever. Well, my view is actually the world does not need incredible leaders. The world needs credible leaders. Organisations need credible leaders who have empathy with the organisation, who are attainable, the sort of people that the people who are being led could become. And also, they're people who have human qualities. Because the trouble with incredible leaders is that they're leading, and what they're leading actually is a load of white space behind them. They're leaving people way behind. So part of my point is actually aspire to be credible. Leadership is actually about lots of little things. It's not about one big thing. And also, just keep looking behind yourself. Because that great idea you've had that has been implemented probably isn't. And actually what may be behind you is a load of people too polite perhaps to ask you what you meant because you're this incredible person and actually not doing what you think they're doing. And after that, not only do you leave an achievement, but you can actually create chaos. So I don't want to dampen your aspirations, but aspire to be credible, which is actually a bit harder than aspire to be incredible. Reasonable or unreasonable? My view, and I work in a political environment, some of you do, we're all affected by politics. I have to work with political leaders, and I actually think that good leaders are always, to a degree, unreasonable. Unreasonable, and they set the stretch. They set the aspiration. However, they have to be unreasonable with respect. And I've worked with unreasonable leaders who don't have respect, and people are either frightened of them or don't follow them. I've worked with unreasonable leaders who set the stretch target, and people actually want to aspire to that. And colleagues who work for you will set the usual trap. They will say, okay, that's a stretch target. How do you think we're going to do that? Now, if it's a with respect situation, the trap they're setting you is to get you pulled back into the wiring. My advice, my view, the leaders I admire are those who are, to a degree, unreasonable, just ahead of the game, who actually say, I actually trust you, you're all highly competent, you're all highly valued people, it's Lee's team. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think you do. So push yourself to the unreasonable end of the scale, but also temper that as well. Credible, unreasonable. Strange bedfellows as words, but possibly worth thinking about. Expert versus general. Not general as in the army, but general as in universal. Or expert plus general. When I first met Lee 4 years ago, going back a slide actually, we didn't come tonight to do a double act, we just are two speakers. But trust me, and you probably see it, Lee is over that end of the spectrum. And when I first met Lee, he came in and said, I don't understand what you do. He also said lots of people don't think the council does it very well, but we'll leave that one to one side. But I don't understand what you do, but I need you to do some things for me. And I need it by Friday. I need it by next Friday. And he badgers, etc., etc. The unreasonableness is out there. However, what Lee wanted us to do was to deliver on a project, a prospect, a concept that we hadn't got a clue about. And we had a choice. We had a choice to say, actually, we don't do that. We do social services, we do road cleaning, we do libraries. Or we said, actually, we think you know what you're talking about. You've got a track record. We are going to apply our general capacity to follow your expert leadership. And that's a choice that, you don't have to be the top of an organisation to exercise that choice. If you run a small team in any organisation, you will be faced with choices. And are you going to say, actually, we do what we do, and we'll do it to our own level of knowledge and competence? Or are you going to seek the experts if you're not the expert? And most organisations, particularly public sector, I realise it's a mixed audience tonight, are very powerful organisations. And the question we face is, how are we going to use the power that we have? So we as a City Council are an enormously powerful organisation. If we choose to use that power in a mediocre way, following our own general expertise, we will achieve mediocre outcomes. If we're prepared to follow expertise wherever it lies, then we will achieve better outcomes. But somebody, you, I would suggest, have to make that choice and grant that permission to follow. And you're going to go on an exercise over the next few months on this programme of collaboration. The great value of this programme is actually there's 50 of you will get to know each other, probably for a professional lifetime of collaboration. And working in partnership is learning the art of letting go. It's dealing with that question before it's raised about what happens if the person I respect and trust asks me to do something that we don't normally do, or actually I don't particularly want to do. Well, welcome to the world of working in partnership. And you, as leaders, will need to give that permission and model it. I see lots of partnerships that are great whilst everybody likes each other, and they're great for as long as the partnership is not trying to do anything. But the minute it tries to do something, then they fall apart because they haven't tested themselves. And they haven't faced up to this simple equation, basically, about letting go. And actually, the bigger the organisation, the harder it is to let go, because you can't control your whole organisation. And in letting go, you are assuming that the rest of the organisation for which you are responsible for, but which you can't command on a daily basis, is going to follow that particular lead. Making sense and telling the story. We live in a very complicated world. You face lots of choices. Leaders, in my view, are the people who make sense of this complicated world. They tell the story to those for whom they have a responsibility, and they articulate the direction. And for me, I think this is sometimes one of the most understated roles of leadership. Sometimes, most leaders, some leaders just transmit the complication. They just passport it through. And my proposition is that you need to consider pausing, filtering, making sense, and articulating for your organisation, or your initiative, or your company. And I guess, Lee, that's what you're saying about making sense of 1998. It was an opportunistic world and a complicated world, but somebody made sense of it for the opportunity. Choices are scary. It's the easiest thing in the world to avoid making a choice. And the trouble with choices, there's two trouble with choices. The first thing, actually, you have a choice about whether to make a choice or not. At the moment, particularly in the policy environment we live in, both public and private, this government is pushing choices down to a local level. And what it's saying is to Sheffield, or parts of Sheffield, or the business community of Sheffield, we'd like you to lead. We'd like you to shape your destiny. We'd like you to improve this. We'd like you to take responsibility for that. But what they also say is, but you don't have to. And if you don't have to, your place, this place called Sheffield, may not be, or Sheffield City Region, may not be the improved place you want it to be. So the first choice we have is to decide that we're going to put ourselves in the making things happen camp, rather than the being done to camp. If I'm going to be slightly political about this but not critical, the 13 years of a Labour government was a highly centralised system that actually told us what to do. The current system, for whatever reason, is much, much more permissive. It's permissive in a highly constrained resource situation, and that isn't to put a value judgment on coalition government versus Labour government. I think Labour would acknowledge that analysis as well. So the first scary bit is you have to make a choice. But the second scary bit is you have to make a good choice. And you have to stand by that choice. And you have to articulate that choice. But we also need to recognise, as individual leaders, that we can make bad choices. A colleague of mine who used to run Manchester Airport, he always said to his staff, I'd like you to be as good as me. And at best I get 7 things out of 10 right. So I'll settle for 7 things out of 10 being right. But my only plea is don't make the same mistake twice. A hugely, hugely permissive environment, but a permissive environment that said to people, please, please make choices. And if you are a leader, part of my job is to constantly make choices, make decisions on behalf of the organisation. And then, how do you define yourself? It's really good exercise is for you to ask yourself, what do I do? Describe what I do. And once you've got through the professional title, I am a police officer, I am a social worker, I am an entrepreneur, define yourself a bit further. And do you define yourself as, I'm the chief executive and I oversee £1.5 billion of expenditure each year in Sheffield. Input. I define myself by what I spend, what I invest. Interesting, but not very high impact. Or do you say, actually, I spend 1.5 billion and as a result we care for X number of children, etc., etc., etc. Output model. Bit more interesting. Problem is, it's very narrow because all it defines is the direct impact of my organisation. I am a police officer, I investigate criminals and I prevent crime. Or do you actually define yourself as the outcome? And the interesting thing about the outcome is it's the impact I'm going to have. I am a social worker, and through caring for people and using all of my other professional expertise, I'm helping making Sheffield a safer place. Now, I don't want to do that sort of rather cliche, NASA, I'm a cleaner, I'm helping to put a man on the moon, because I just think that's a bit sickly. But the issue about the outcome is it takes you to a leadership place where you can actually have an impact without any resources whatsoever. Because if you have credible expertise, if you have determination, if you're a demanding person, then actually you can say that I've got £1 to spend, and with this £1 I'm going to achieve that output, but I also know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to shape the efforts of loads of people over here. We in Sheffield have just gained control over £24 million of skills investment the government used to spend. And we did it without any money whatsoever. We did it because the people who made the argument for us, who worked for us, knew more about the issue than the people who had the money. And they won the argument through their credibility. And Sheffield, as a consequence, I suspect, will be a slightly better place. And I think this is a key thing to think about. And maybe you start this journey individually as output thinking. Maybe collectively as a cohort of 50 people, you'll end up deciding what outcome you're going to have. You're not always the leader. You don't always have to be that stretch person. And the point about this is numerous, really. One is the person who's always the leader is a really sort of tiresome sort of person. But actually good leaders know when to follow. And it's excellent leadership to say, we're going to follow the leadership of that agency or that person. But to do that, you have to give permission to your organisation to follow as well. And also remember that leaders are everywhere within an organisation. It isn't just about you. The other key thing here for me is that, particularly when you run an organisation of more than a few people, How do the people in your organisation know what you would do when you're not there? And sometimes it's when you're not there because it's your day off. Sometimes it's because you employ 10,000 people and you haven't got a hope in hell of running it on a command issue. So it's always imagining the situation that actually when I personally am not leading something, how a good thing is going to continue to happen. How do they know, not just what's expected of them, but what is permitted of them. I remember speaking recently to a government minister who was saying, you know, this government is really, really up for risky ventures. You know, we want to see innovation, and we're quite prepared for failure. I thought that was very interesting, because they said if you can't fail, you won't try. And I said that's great, but there's a third bit beyond that. So we take the risk and we fail, and then what do you do? Do you say this is outrageous that Sheffield has failed on this? I want answers immediately. Department for Transport, rail, that sort of thing. Or do you say, actually, you know what? You can't blame them for trying, never mind. That's probably asking too much. Or could they possibly say, it's a shame they've failed. I'd be quite interested to hear from them as to what they've learnt from it, and whether the failure is a failure of system, or a failure of policy, or a failure of an individual. But let's hear their side of the story. That's a big example, but in a small example, if your staff, your colleagues, if they're going to, the consequence of failing and being blamed is that people actually stop trying. They don't get it right next time. There isn't a next time. Nearly there. I've done this deliberately because it's the start of your journey, and these are the issues that I think the city region faces, and they're not tangible sort of economic, social issues. They're thematic issues.